So I'm going to talk a little bit to follow on to Jill's talk about what does it mean to be a successful mentee, and so I'm going to give credit right now to one of my mentees, which is Julie Welch. And Julie is a faculty member at Indiana University, and she's actually now the director of mentoring at Indiana CTSI, and has funding for that role. She has actually created this role for herself. Honestly, when I became chair at IU, that was known. It had been announced. I kind of signed the paper at Thanksgiving and said I'll be arriving in July. And so when I came to SAEM that year, I'm in the ladies' room, and this woman is there with her, baby in the stroller, and she's doing the thing. And she says, "I think you're Dr. Hobgood." And I said, "Yeah, I am." She goes, "Oh, I'm Julie Welch. I'm going to be one of your new faculty members." And I said, "Okay." And that was Henry in the stroller. And so we went off and had breakfast and had a very good conversation about, stuff. But one of the things that, we talked about was, what were going to be the next steps for Julie's career. And so one of the very first things that I did when I got to IU was actually to talk with some folks in the dean's office. They wanted Julie to take over the committee for women at IU, and Julie was being resistant, and I couldn't understand that. I was like, "Julie, why are you pushing back on this? Do you know, this is a great thing. This is a good opportunity for you. It comes with some protection. This is a perfect thing for you." And she goes, "No, I really want to do more around mentoring, and I really think there's something there, and I need to do this work." And I'm like, "Okay, fine." So I went and talked to the dean for faculty development at the time, and he said, "Well, why don't we create a fellowship for her in what was then the Office of Faculty Development and Professional Development, OFAPD," and so we did. So Steve and I split some time for Julie to go and create this fellowship in this space, and then ultimately from that, so she became a faculty fellow in that office and learned a lot of skills around faculty development, but equally importantly, did some stuff with the Women's Council, so there was a little quid pro quo in there. So she did a little something they wanted her to do, and she went and they gave her some things that she wanted to do, and then she actually made a lot of contacts, and ultimately then really started developing this mentorship program within the Office of Faculty Development at IU. And a lot of the things that you'll see on my slides are a lot of the resources that she's compiled for folks to utilize in that space. But even more importantly, then she went on to gotten written into our CTSI grant as an important component of, how are we going to further the career of our scientists in this, Translational Science Institute, and has gotten, her name on lots of big grants, and it has gotten a fair amount of protected time for this. And most importantly, she just got promoted to professor, which makes me very happy. So that's a good story of some success. And so, really the objective of this talk is just to, identify these strategies. And, I think we talked about all these things that, what is a mentor? And, they're absolutely, both your teacher and your coach and your advisor, all of that. Hopefully a role model, someone, honestly, a little bit of your confidant. I mean, someone, like some of the conversations, I'm like, a little bit of a shrink, you got to have that kind of family therapist thing going on in that space that's actually really useful. And so developing that relationship and understanding the key elements of that, for me, mostly resides, honestly, with the mentee. We can talk about all these components of effective mentoring, but, this concept of, reciprocity, mutual respect, commitment, clear expectations, accountability, and fit, we've already, we talked about. But the things that mentees bring to the table, I think, and you've heard me say it already several times, is, there's a lot of work in being a mentee. This is not a passive relationship. It is a relationship that really needs to be driven from the large perspective from the side of the mentee. The mentor doesn't often, reach down and say, "Oh, well, we need to schedule regular meetings, and we need to do this, that, and the other." They may give you that advice, but if you don't follow through, then, that's not, that's not mutual respect, quite frankly. That's not accountability, shared accountability that, that actually will further the relationship and allow people to develop. And so being proactive, taking initiative, and driving the relationship is, I think, really the essential element of the mentor-mentee relationship that is, really keeps it on the rails, if you will. But the mentee really also needs to be open. Not only are they willing to do the work, and when I say the do the work, I mean, the therapy, like do the work, but you need to be comfortable actually asking for specific things. I need you to help me do X, Y, or Z. And you need to be comfortable receiving feedback. And sometimes that feedback may not, it's not all going to be rah, rah, rah. And honestly, you don't want it to be all, rah, rah. You need some rah, rah, right? Everybody needs that atta-girl now and again. But the most important things are the actual person's ability to assess your, where your gaps are, what your capacity is for the next step, and have those frank conversations around those times, those 2 times a month that Jane's already alluded to that you failed. Like, what happened here? That debrief and really talking about what worked in this situation and what didn't work, I think is really, really important. Understanding and respecting the mentor's time is also really important. Like if you've scheduled meetings or you've said you're going to do things, then you really need to do that, because if you consistently show up and you're poorly prepared, or you haven't done things, or you call just at the whim and it's just a trivial thing that if you thought about it for 2 seconds, you would have been able to resolve yourself. Not to say you can't have that kind of relationship, but this is not like calling your girlfriend and saying, hey, you can't believe this, and having this little session. It's a different kind of relationship, and it's important that you recognize that and honor that, frankly. And then obviously being honest and trustworthy and being passionate about what you are trying to achieve. So these are a couple of the things that are on the Mentor and Mentee Toolkit that's on the IU website. So you guys can go to this, Office of Faculty Affairs and Professional Development at IU, and pull down some of these things, particularly some of the worksheets that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But the 3 things that I think you need to really think about is like, what's your purpose in this? Like, what are you trying to get out of it? And then, how do you then, define that purpose? And so when you think about that, you really need to understand what do you think your gaps are. When I've been doing my pitch follow-ons at my table, I'm like, well, what do you think you need in order to be successful in that space? Like, what's your personal self-assessment in that? And it's not that the mentor might expect you to have all the answers, but they sure do want to know that you're thinking about it. They sure do want to know that you are willing to actually interrogate your own reality and have an honest appraisal of kind of where you are, what you think you need, and what you want to do. And then again, this next thing that I think is really important about what space are you trying to work in? Yep, you guys have seen this before, and it's because there's a lot of things on here that you may or may not be working with this person for a particular, might be more project oriented. It might encompass all those things. It might be very much more focused, but you need to have some clarity around that. So what are you looking for in terms of, is it professional development or is it more personal development? Those 2 things can be intermingled, but if you were thinking that you wanted to develop a career path about creating engagement across a multidisciplinary cohort around wellness and development, that's more project focused, as opposed to having a leadership goals that you want to personally move along the path, or figuring out how am I going to accomplish all this stuff that I've set out? How am I going to be a successful researcher, achieve promotion, be a wife and a mother, and still be personally well? Those things are really important and are actually in different domains. So you really need to do this thing, which I think is important, which is an individual development plan, to really think about what do you hope to gain from this, and to put that down on paper. And it might not be right, it might not be perfect, but it is a starting point for achieving one of the next things, which I think is, is really clarity, and helps you move the conversation, being deliberate about this work, being deliberate about the tasks that are before you. And again, when you're giving feedback to a trainee or anyone in your life, it's a lot easier if you can slide that objective piece of paper across the table and say, like, here's the assessment form that we've devised, and let's talk about where you're mapping out in all of these domains, right? We all have had some experience with that. The same thing for an individual development plan, because if you've gotten it written down, you can slide that piece of paper across the table and say, like, let's map out a plan for the following things, or let's really talk about this because it's discrete. And so, again, the data is pretty clear on this, particularly around research and really moving women and any mentee along a career path that is focused. But it's really important to achieve clarity about what your personal expectations are, what your needs are, and have that conversation with your mentor. And then once you develop your IDP, then using SMART goals to help you incrementally achieve those progress. And so SMART goals are really focused on being measurable, achievable, and time limited. So all of this really drills down on this point of clarity. Again, having clear expectations, what are our mutual roles and responsibility, and how are we going to hold each other accountable for this? And I think that is particularly important, which means that you should have an agenda when you come to the meeting. Let's have a checklist of the things that you're going to achieve. Drill down on a timeline for how you're going to actualize your individual development plan. And then again, kind of in the spirit of what Neha was saying earlier about, like, is this a time limited engagement? Like, what's our review, our annual review of this? How are we collectively doing in this mentorship relationship? Now, that's a very formalized plan, and it's a lot different than some of the types of relationships that others have talked about. But it is, if you are engaging in that kind of a formal process, it's important to formalize it. And so I think that is worth doing. Particularly, again, around your individual goals, you have to be very clear about what you are looking for when you approach someone to be your mentor, and that you're asking them to be to be their mentee. Feedback is a tough one. Angela was talking about earlier about how to give that feedback in a way that is compassionate and allows a person to hear. But you have to be resilient in this space, and you have to know each other enough to know that person's intent is good, and that's, I think, really particularly important. And so the idea about what's your big long-range vision, I've talked to folks about that in our coaching conversations at the table about where are you trying to go with this? What are you trying to accomplish? Again, getting to that sense of purpose and that sense of clarity, but having that vision for yourself, but then also being receptive to a different vision that your mentor might have for you that you may never have held for yourself. When someone says, I really think you could do this, that is a risk, and you are willing to receive that. That's a risk-taking behavior on your part, that you're actually willing to take that risk and step out into that space. And you will do that with thoughtfulness and being very deliberate. But the idea here is also being willing to kind of accept that challenge and receive, honestly, the gift that person is trying to give you to help push you along, to propel you further in your career. And then again, this concept of commitment, really being committed to the relationship, being focused, being deliberate, being generous with your time and your energy, and being thoughtful. And so, earlier there was a question about, like, well, so what does ineffective mentoring look like? And There's a lot of ineffective mentoring out there, and just that whole concept of do you just don't clash? That you're two people that there's not a lot of joy in your interpersonal relationship. It's just not fun. You're like, oh God, I got to go see my mentees coming today. Oh my God, that's just not like, if you're like got that like sense, then you might want to think about maybe this isn't a good fit. If you don't communicate, like if you consistently don't feel like you've either been heard or or hearing or understanding what that person is trying to say to you, you got to be willing to have that accurate self-assessment and really call it. And if the goals don't match, if they're unrealistic, the timeline's poor, that's also important. And then again, if you're not committed to making it work and you don't make time for it, then it's never going to if it's never going to work. I think the example that you gave earlier was I would categorize that as kind of abuse of power. Like they took your intellectual property, they abused their stature. That is just a person who is not is not really worthy of your moving forward in that relationship. And so again, you have to really think about that. And particularly in scientific relationships, often competition does come into play. When the mentee suddenly is becoming more prominent than the mentor, I have observed many times that can be a very uncomfortable thing, and often you'll see that those breakups can be very, they can be really not pretty. And so again, observing that as the mentee, and being willing to actually call that and have that conversation is really important. And hopefully you may need to acquire another mentor at that time to actually help you have the conversation with your other mentor to say, what's happening is, I could tell that when I got that, lead article in the New England Journal, you were a little, something changed in our relationship, and being able to call that and have that conversation is really, really important. And you should feel empowered to do that because it's important that you do this. And to say, I want to be respectful of everything that you've given me, but, maybe it might be time for it's time for me to fledge this nest, and I think that's okay. And being at least that the conversation may not go as you had hoped, but at least you will have been intellectually and emotionally honest with yourself, and that is also a very important thing. And then this concept of gender and diversity bias. I will say that there are many more men who can mentor us than there are women, and our tendency is to, seek out, women to help us, and there are certain things that women can help us with, but they're often, our male colleagues are often really very, very good mentors as well, and we should not deny them the opportunity, or ourselves the opportunity, to be mentored by them. Particularly, if you think about it for a minute, if you're like, we are women in a man's world in a lot of ways, and we're trying to move up in institutions that are still predominantly male, and so the skills that I have or that I possess may not necessarily be the kinds of skills that you need, or I may not be able to give you the clarity of understanding about what's going to be effective in that other space that a male mentor may be able to help you with. And so recognizing that and being willing to branch out is important, but obviously be aware of bias, and honestly, be thoughtful about, sexual impropriety in that space as well. I'm just going to say it. Everybody, I told the other chairs I was going to say it, and they're like, oh God, you're going to be controversial. And I'm like, well, I always have been. No, I stopped now. But, honestly, be thoughtful about that. Oftentimes these relationships can get very, very close, and, the person who almost always loses are sitting in this room. So again, some concepts to think about, having a divorce rule, like let's be clear about, like, if this isn't working, how are we going to break up? You know, having, again, that conversation that I said about, you know, having that, being willing to have that difficult conversation with your mentor, getting that additional bit of advice. And then sometimes, you know, you can just let it fizzle. You know, just let it just fizzle on out. And then go find someone else to help you. You should always believe that you are going to be on a progressive path of having multiple mentors through your life. You know, there are always going to be, you know, you hope that you're going to have this one great iconic mentor, and that's lovely. But, you know, the reality of that is that's seldom, that's few and far between. The reality is that people help you intermittently at different times and really help you, you know, progress. And then, you know, obviously bringing a mediator or having a formal appeal would be something for more structured, scientific type mentoring relationships. So, again, you drive the relationship as the mentee. Have personal clarity of purpose and what you actually hope to gain from it. And then when you do that, achieve, again, clarity and commitment from your mentor, and find someone whose values match your own. And I think if you do that, then you will be a very successful mentee. Thank you.